Hey, what's up? It's Nick Handley, The Nick Handley Show, episode number 5 on a very busy week of Husker athletics, including Husker football. Not only the National Signing Day, which is taking place as I am recording this, but also you've got your first bowl practice. You've got the transfer portal window opening, which has been a lot more active as we expected than it was a year ago. Coaching changes as well. All of that going on here. And we've got Husker Volleyball to talk about this weekend, and we're going to be joined. I got to get over that, man. I am going to be joined by Lincoln Arneal, Husker Volleyball insider, who's going to be joining me a little bit later on to talk more about Nebraska's number 2 overall seed in the NCAA tournament in their march for a national championship. Nobody in the country seems to be playing better volleyball right now than Nebraska. So we'll get into all of that. As you've been following for the last 3 days, and there were already guys that were in the transfer portal when we got into this week. And I want to get into those guys. The impact, is it a casualty of the 105-man roster number that Nebraska and all other college football teams have to get down to? Or were there some surprises along the way? I'll get into that in just a moment. I want to go with the biggest news, in my opinion, and it wasn't necessarily the Tony White departure. I'll touch on that in just a moment. To me, it was locking Dana Holgorsen in as the Nebraska offensive coordinator for the next 2 years, getting paid a little bit more than $1 million per year. Look, this was something, in my opinion, that had to happen. And the reason I say this, to me, is a little bit more important or a little bit bigger news than the Tony White departure is going all the way back to last year. We all knew that Tony White, given the success that he had as a defensive coordinator, was going to have a lot of job opportunities. He almost left for USC in a similar position last year, in the exact same position as a defensive coordinator. So that was always on the table, that this was a guy that was on many people's radars. He was on a fast track to either be a head coach or to potentially elevate his position as a DC somewhere else. Now, a lot of you could say, well, the Florida State gig, isn't that more of a lateral move considering what the Noles came off of this past year? It's interesting because obviously when you look at Norvell and Florida State and the season that they had, is he on borrowed time? Is this a make or break season for Florida State? And could you reshuffle the coaching staff if this Florida State team does not perform at a high level next year? Obviously that is the case, but for what Tony White is looking to do and having the recruiting base that he will have out there, it's an intriguing position, and it's another opportunity for Tony White to flex that defensive muscle and that mind to show people that, yes, not only was he a high-level defensive coordinator at Nebraska, but also at Syracuse before that. If he can turn Florida State around, that stock is going to go even higher. I go back to Dana Holgorsen. Holgorsen, for me, was somebody that you know of as an offensive-minded guy, going all the way back to his time with Mike Leach in Texas Tech, but also as in doses of success at both West Virginia and even at Houston as a head coach. This is a guy that has always elevated an offense, and more importantly, has elevated plenty of quarterbacks around him. And for the number one goal for Nebraska in the 2025 season, for them to build off of what will be a 6-6, one game better than they were in 2023, and a bowl season and extended practices, having Dana Holgorsen there with a lot of the young talent that Nebraska will have, including guys that signed today that could even be a part of bowl preparation with the new NCAA rule. If you are an early enrollee, depending on when Nebraska plays, and we'll find out this Sunday, it looks like it very well could be the Pinstripe Bowl on December 28th in New York. But having those guys even around this system, learning a lot of the nuances of this offense and how Dana Holgorsen wants to teach it, could be very beneficial. Make no mistake about it. This offense is going to be extremely young next year. In a lot of areas of importance, it's going to be an experience. But the one area that it will be experienced, that this is where I think the Dana Holgorsen news is the biggest, is at quarterback. Now, I said this last time I talked on the podcast over the weekend when I was discussing with Evan Bland the Iowa game. and the results of that game. Now, a lot of things that were very familiar with this offense when it's been more down, mainly the total points that were put up. But the fact that Nebraska was able to outgain Iowa, basically double up their total yardage against a very good Iowa defense. That is a quality Iowa defense. Phil Parker, anytime that you can rack up over 300 yards, in my opinion, on Phil Parker, and you can be moving the football, and you have a quarterback that at times, I think more times than not, was in rhythm, that's something to get excited about. So what I was looking at with the Dana Holgorsen commitment was it's also a commitment to Dylan Raiola. Now, what happens after this is all going to be up to Dana Holgorsen, in my opinion, because Dana Holgorsen, by many accounts, has said that he wants to get back into head coaching. But I think a lot of people around him, and I think people that are in the business understand, for a guy like Dana Holgorsen to be back at the head coaching level, at the FBS level, and the Power Four ranks, you need a little bit of that image rehab, if you will, or a little bit of that rediscovering of the stock of Dana Holgorsen. If you can take a bottom level offense that Nebraska has been the last 2 years, I mean, it's been bad, and you can take them into, say, a top 25 offense, even a top 40 offense, to where you don't have to look at the offense as the major problem in all three phases, where it's actually helping on multiple down days that the defense could be having, where maybe they're winning shootouts. That's going to ramp up Dana Holgorsen's stock. But the most important part of this commitment is what it means for Dylan Raiola. You saw in a very small window, in a very small sample size, in a short time, that Dana Holgorsen had a chance to, sure, he could learn about Dylan Raiola, maybe knowing that this was in the cards all along. But until you are there physically and you're physically present and you're working with them and you're giving the verbiage and you're being able to watch the things right in front of you and then being able to take them aside and be able to talk with Dylan off to the side, be able to discover processes and the way that he is thinking in each moment of practice and games is it's a huge benefit. And so when I think about what this means for Nebraska, I think it's huge. I think the Dana Holgorsen commitment was very, very big, and I think it's only going to be a positive for this offense. Now, of course, he's already bringing in some of his own staffers. We're going to talk about a new wide receiver coach as well, a guy that used to be at Kentucky. Also, what does that mean for guys like Eric McGuire? Will he remain on staff? Sounds like he very well could remain on staff, just in a different role. What does that mean for all the other offensive staff members? We will find out. In my opinion, you got to let Dana Holgorsen come in, the guys that he's most comfortable with, whether those guys are on staff right now or not, and chances are most of them are not, that you go out and you let him get whoever he needs. This is a Matt rule. You're bringing this guy in for a reason. Let him handle that part of the football. Let him bring in the guys that he knows he's going to have success with, guys that can elevate this entire offense from offensive line to wide receiver to running back, every part of it. That is going to be very big. The Tony White thing, again, this isn't shocking to me. Maybe the fact that he didn't leave Nebraska to be a head coach is the only somewhat surprise. And the fact that he's going in essentially a last-ditch effort for Florida State and Norvell and what he's trying to accomplish there, I think is going to be fascinating to watch. But Tony White has given this defense everything that you could hope for. I know a lot of people were interested, were curious when Tony White got here of how it would look. I would think, I feel this way. I'm assuming a lot of you would agree that it looked better than we ever could have thought. Guys like Ty Robinson and Nash Hutmacher being able to elevate their play. Guys like John Bullock, the kind of season he had this year. You saw a lot of good things in the 2 years from Tony White's defense. And the good news is Matt Rule is a defensive-minded guy, and he's got defensive connections, whether we're talking about a guy like Phil Snow, whether we're talking about an Elijah Robinson, whoever. There are a lot of people out there that Matt Rule has connections with, and I think having that base that Nebraska has established with this defense will be interesting because there's, again, a lot of younger players. That linebacking core that Nebraska signed today is going to be exciting to watch. Now, we will get to the transfers here in a little bit after I talk to Lincoln, when we talk some Husker volleyball here in a little bit. But there are so many things about the defense that doesn't necessarily worry me as much with the absence of Tony White. Now, I will say with the absence of Terrence Knighton, that to me is a big deal. And that to me might be a reason why one guy who surprised me a little bit in James Williams that decided to hit the transfer portal after the opportunity he had at Nebraska and the production that he did have in Nebraska. I think there's definitely something there with the fact that Terrence Knight will not be his position coach, because I think there was obviously a strong connection there. You saw that in a lot of instances this year. You saw that in the Rutgers game. There was a lot of emotion on the sideline. Terrence Knight loved that guy. James Williams felt the same, and it was reciprocated. So I think that could be a casualty of Terrence Knight leaving. What Terrence Knight did with his defensive line was extremely impressive. And so that to me is a big loss. What will Nebraska do defensively? Well, it's all going to start with the coordinator. It's going to start with who they bring in and the guys that they're able to retain. I hope Rob Dvorak is still around. I think Rob Dvorak is a star on this staff. I think he's a budding star on this staff. I think it's going to be interesting to see if John Butler is looked at as a defensive coordinator and what is his connections with the current staff right now too. All of that remains in flux, but that's why this is the silly season, the fun season. But the best part about this is we get to talk about a bowl, and we'll find out this Sunday officially where Nebraska is going. Again, it sounds like there's a strong possibility that Nebraska could line up or wind up in New York City, could play in the Pinstripe Bowl against an ACC opponent. We'll find out. That's a December 28th at 11 a.m. game, by the way, if you are curious. So a lot to get to on that front. I want to talk about some of the big signings today. I also want to get into the transfers as it stands right now, the guys that have made their announcement, and why most of these make sense, and maybe why a couple were more of a surprise. What's not a surprise, though, is that Nebraska volleyball has found themselves into the NCAA tournament and is one of the top seeds in the NCAA tournament as the number 2 overall seed. They will be hosting both the first and second round and then the regional semis and regional finals if Nebraska gets there at the Bob Devaney Sports Center as the number 2 overall seed. It's going to be competitive, but Nebraska's been playing as good as we've seen them all season long, and I'm happy to be joined now. Lincoln Arneal, who is a Nebraska volleyball insider. He is covering everything when it comes to not only Nebraska volleyball, Big Ten volleyball as well. First of all, Lincoln, good afternoon. It's been a fun day around Nebraska. We got signing day, we got transfer portals, we got all kinds of things happening. Yeah. But how are you?
I'm good. And the Big Ten just handed out their volleyball awards. So news is it's flowing like a hose right now, just trying to get a gulp.
I got to ask you this. How does the Big Ten have 25 members on the first team? We can't even get them to do a preseason first and second team in football, and yet they've got 25 on the first team.
It's dumb. They had 18 last year. I thought, oh, that's enough. Oh, wait, but you add 4 teams, which means you need to add 7. I assume there was a tie for that last spot, which of course, but somebody needs to step in and say, no, that's good. Like I did this earlier this week and tried to come up with mine. I came up with 4. There's good players in the Big Ten. That's true. But like I created 4 teams of 7 players each. I honored 28 people, but it's way too much. It's unwieldy. And there's also a second team that we haven't even talked about yet. So it's way too many.
And obviously a lot of Nebraska representation on the first team. I'm assuming they'll probably be on all teams as long as 5 right now.
5. Yep. 5.
Yeah. It's this team. I want to go all the way back, Lincoln, as Nebraska will open up on Friday. We'll get to the matchups and Florida A&M. Then you got Miami and South Dakota State on the other side of that bracket on Friday. Watching this team early on, and we go back to the SMU game where a lot of people were wondering if some of the preseason expectations, there was some drama around this team with the Harper Murray part of it. Then there was the E60. You were a big part of that documentary, and you were quoted in that a lot too. All of it came out around the time that Nebraska began the season. And I thought it was a very good move by ESPN in promoting the product itself. But there was a time where I think, at least I did for a moment, wondering, have they been put on too big of a platform where it's a little distracting? And then we find out that, SMU is actually pretty good. But where were you with this team as far as what you were seeing early on that either concerned you or just seemed a little bit off?
I think, everyone is very concerned after that SMU match too, because again, the hype had been built up. This was the same exact key players from a year ago that made the national title match. They've improved. They added some key pieces, some big transfers from the portal. So they should just come out and be a juggernaut and race through everyone. And then, oh no, you get swept by unranked SMU in the second week of the year. And I think people then, like you said, those distractions, kind of the cloud, but then they righted the ship, had some big wins against Creighton, against Stanford, against Louisville. And it's like, oh, and then SMU started winning matches too. Like, oh, okay. Maybe it's not. And that really settled things down. I think maybe that's kind of where, I don't know, not to jump ahead, but that's where you feel maybe after that Penn State was maybe one of those other wake-up calls of, oh no, Nebraska's humming along, beating Wisconsin, going through the Big Ten schedule undefeated. Then, oh no, they lose at Penn State. Is this a panic? Like, Penn State's a very good team too. They got a number 1 seed in their region as well too. So I think that there was a lot of things going on in the preseason, and it took a while for them to recenter themselves and get that wake up call that you're not going to be handed this. You have to work through the difficulties of the season, the challenges that lay ahead, and they did. I think they took that, and I feel like every single press conference week, at least once, that SMU match would be referenced by the players or Cook as like that was the turning point of the season. That kind of helped them out.
Watching them now, I don't know if I've seen a team look as dominant as they have, and maybe it was the SMU part of it. Maybe it was just getting through the first part of the Big Ten slate, being challenged every night. It just seems like this group, and this is going to sound somewhat disrespectful to previous teams that have made it either to a national championship or have won, but it just seems they seem dominant to the point that I feel, and maybe I'm off here, you have a stronger connection and vibe to this. I feel this team, despite how competitive this field is, seems like a bigger favorite this year than they were a year ago based on the way that they're playing, based on what I've seen against very strong competition where they have not blinked.
Yeah, I mean, Nebraska has played a schedule that very few teams have ever played. I mean, they've played every single team in the top 10 except for Pitt. And I think, I mean, I've watched a lot of this year too, because they kind of one of those teams that really, I mean, they were in the top 5 for almost all year, and I've watched them, and they also look scary too. And I'm kind of glad Nebraska hasn't played them, because that would be a dream end of this season. So I think Nebraska is a heavy favorite, but I think Pitt's also very good too. They got a lot of players, and Pitt's made 3 straight Finals Four. And I think they're also better than last year's team that Nebraska swept in the national semifinal. So Nebraska is a heavy favorite, but I think that Nebraska and Pitt are definitely in a tier above the rest of the field.
I want to go back to last year in the injury to Lindsey Krause. You had a little bit more shuffling of the deck, if you will, for what Nebraska had to do going into postseason. When you look at their rotation, even the way that they've used, where early in the season we didn't really see a lot of consistent use of Taylor Landfair, but as we talk about one of those additions to the team, she seems to have found a spot. It just seems that everybody's very accepting to the roles, but more than anything, it seems like that's established, and the health for the most part seems to be a lot better than where it was this time a year ago.
Yeah. I mean, Lindsey Krause bounced back, and they had opportunities, and they were kind of juggling. But I think John Cook just likes the upside of Taylor Landfair and what she brings. I mean, when she's on, she's one of the better hit. I mean, she won Big Ten Player of the Year. She's not. I don't think she's in that kind of status right now. She's a different player now than she was as a sophomore. But when she's on, she can do a lot of good things. And the good part about Nebraska is that I think they have more depth than they've had in previous years. I mean, last year they had to dip into it with Ali Batenhorst coming in after Krause got injured. But this year their depth is still in reserve, which is good. I mean, between Lindsey Krause is able to come in and play for a set or two. Layla Blackwell, maybe the best third middle blocker on a team anywhere in the country. She's overvalued. I mean, maybe undervalued, but she's overqualified is probably the best way to term it. Overqualified for that role, and just really provides a depth. So I think Nebraska has to like where they're sitting. To get 3 defensive specialists that could be liberos and 75% of the teams in the country, if not more. So Nebraska's depth is what can help them handle the rigors of the 3-week sprint to Louisville.
Lincoln, I want to get into the year 1 to year 2 jump for a couple of players, including Harper Murray. But I do want to go into one of the newcomers that has had a pretty strong role despite what has been a very locked-in veteran group, even with some of those sophomores. And Olivia Mock, we've seen a lot more of her, and I think that was always the hope coming out of Bennington, that she was going to be able to hit the ground running. My biggest question is, would she find a spot? Would she be able to be consistently in the rotation because of as you mentioned, how much depth this group already has? Olivia Mock has been a big part of that.
Yeah, and she's earned it too. I remember in the spring when we were talking to Cook after they played the match out in Kearney. His plan was to redshirt her and kind of let Lexi do her thing, let Lainey kind of handle that DS role. And Merritt Beeson, Harper Murray plays 6 rotations too, but but Olivia changed that conversation because she was so good. I think her and Skylar Pierce have set a record for most wins during beach season. So even before they got on the hardwood, she's like putting everyone on notice that I'm here and I'm ready to compete at this level. So she really played her way into that and made it impossible to keep her off the court. And I think behind Lexi, she's Nebraska's second best pass receiver and serve receive. So she's really kind of established herself. Has a very calm demeanor, which is very important for a defensive specialist. So she's really played her way and really kind of added to that depth that Nebraska, I think they eventually knew that she was going to be good, but to have her have this kind of impact the freshman year, I don't think a lot of people expected until they saw her on the court amongst those peers and realized we got something special here.
We were talking about the Big Ten accolades and the setter of the year and Bergen Riley, Harper, which I don't know where you were on this one, Lincoln. This is another question that I want to get into here in a moment, but just the jump on those two from year 1 to year 2, especially Harper Murray with what she established last year as not just one of the most outstanding freshmen in college volleyball, but one of the best players in college volleyball as a freshman, that there wasn't that much more she could accomplish yet. She seems like a lot of that stuff is behind her too, but also you can't forget about how important Bergen Riley has been and also the jump that she's made from year 1 to year 2.
Yeah, I think Harper, she's made a huge jump. When you look at last year's team, whose team was it last year? Last year, this was Merritt Beeson's team. She was the leading hitter. She kind of dictated everything. This year, this is Harper Murray's team. I think especially, Beeson struggled a little bit, but I think it's more so Murray has elevated her attacking, her passing. I was looking at numbers because I was getting into an argument with some Minnesota fans earlier today about Harper Murray. She's putting up libero-like numbers in serve receive. So, that's always been one of a valuable part of her games too. She doesn't have the gaudy numbers of some of the other attackers who don't have as much help around her, but I think this is Harper Murray's team. She's really taken it. And I think play wise, she's improved, yes, but the biggest jump is just her maturity on the court. The offseason troubles have been well documented. I think that's kind of an outgrowth of that growth process, and she's just more comfortable in who she is, comfortable with what she can do on a court. Adversity hits in the court, she can handle it. So I think that's the biggest growth, and really kind of what's helped Harper Murray elevate her game is that maturity and kind of you saw the negative side effects of not investing everything into what happens on the court affects your mood and your emotions. She's learned how to handle that and elevate. And for Bergen Riley, I think she's really elevated. The coaches have given her a lot more control over the offense. You see her doing a lot more things, controlling dictating the tempo, making Andy Jackson. Andy Jackson was phenomenal. She's improved, but without the help of a good connection with the setter, she's not leading the Big Ten in attack percentage. So a lot of that, I think, comes back to Bergen Riley.
The libero of the year goes to Lexi Rodriguez, which I don't think anybody would bat an eye over that. And it's amazing. There's always, when you cover Husker athletics, Lincoln, I feel like there's always, in any sport, there's always a player that feels like they have been here for 10 years, that even before the COVID year existed, that they've just, and I think it's a true testament to them. It means from the time they got here, they were making an impact to the final season that they were with their respective sports. Lexi Rodriguez is, I don't know if you say the glue, the heartbeat of this team, the internal and external ambassador of this team as well. You see the postseason accolades. I think sometimes we forget she's pretty damn good at what she does, because everything else about her is so positive. And again, I go back to the ambassador part of it. There are so many young girls out there that go to a Nebraska volleyball game, or maybe they're just out and about in Omaha or Lincoln and run into Lexi Rodriguez, and it's almost like a religious experience. They are in awe of her, and yet we forget, yeah, she's been here a while, and she's had that impact from day one.
I actually ran into Lexi last night at the women's basketball game. She would just kind of be there, being trying to fly under the radar too. Gave her, "Hey Lexi, how you doing? Hi Kennedy, how you doing?" So yeah, she is. I mean, she's everyone's. I mean, she's every fan's favorite player more than likely, or she's probably, even if not your favorite player, she's your favorite player's favorite player. And I think too is that she's just so relatable too. I mean, she's 5'5". You see most of these girls women who play volleyball, they're 6 foot, 6'2", whatever. But Lexi just fits in with the rest of us. I mean, she's 5'5", but is just such a good player, such an anchor. I think that's the team. She's just the rock on this team. I mean, not only is she an elite player too, but to watch her growth as a human, as a captain, is really important as the development of the Nebraska teams happened over the last 4 years of her career. So yes, phenomenal player. Glad that, I mean, first ever Libero of the Year award that the Big Ten's done. They used to be Defensive Player of the Year, but she won twice. Now it's Libero. Fitting that Lexi has won that. So, because she is one of the best, if not the best, Libero in the nation. So, but yeah, I think just she's the cornerstone of the Nebraska volleyball team.
I want to go back to Harper Murray, and you hit on a little bit of the off-season distractions, and as we learned in the E60, and you're probably a little more familiar with this as well, of some of the mental health challenges that come with not only the pressure of being at a place like this with the expectations so high, but when you stray from that path, that the straight and narrow, it like she did, and we were educated a little bit more about some of the loss that she's experienced in her life as well. I got to admit, I wasn't sure what to expect out of her this year, because I didn't know if that was much bigger than what we all knew, as far as that weighing on her. And then, of course, there's the pressure that she's putting on herself to be even better than she was in her true freshman year, which was, as we just discussed, very impressive. I'll admit, I was a little nervous or a little worried that there could be a sophomore slump. And I'm curious, where did you see her take I know you talked about the physical part of the game, but just mentally, the growth and being around this team, and maybe more importantly, Lincoln, being around the expectations after experiencing it a year before.
Yeah, I think you saw an incremental growth too. I mean, I remember, again, watching her in beach season. She was not having fun out there. It was a work, it was a chore, and the joy was not there watching her do that. And then the incidents happened, that her run-ins with the law enforcement. And then I think over the season, I think she had a lot of conversations with people important to her life. I mean, her family, with her teammates. And I think, again, the one thing that I really is to come out is her relationship with John Cook. Mitch Sherman wrote a great article for The Athletic about how the bond that they have. I think you see that in the E60 doc as well too. I mean, Harper lost her father at a very young age too. And I feel, I mean, it was a good comparison, but John Cook has kind of filled that void a little bit, of provided that father-like presence in her life too. And I think that was much needed during the summer. He stood by her. I mean, people were calling for her to kick off the team. I thought that was a little extreme. I thought maybe have her sit down a week match or two, or during the first weekend, just kind of, you messed up, sit out, learn from your lesson, and we'll move forward. You're still part of this. You're still a valuable member of this. So I think you saw that growth from her. And also, I thought was a good step by her is she came out, she talked to the media during the preseason when they had their fall camp, and she struggled, couldn't handle one of the questions, was going to make her emotional. So she looked to her teammates, and I think Merritt Beeson picked her up and that. And then, but since that first press conference, we've talked to her several times, and she's been very candid, very upfront, and very open about what she's dealing with too. I mean, we focused a lot more on volleyball after that, but she's been willing to talk to us. And I think that's a sign of maturity, because there were times last year where she hated talking to the media too, because it wasn't part of her personality. But with that maturity, be able to be a little more self-aware and reflect a little bit, I think you've seen a lot of growth from her. So it's good to see. I'm proud of her. And I think it's been a journey, and a lot of people haven't been on a journey like that. And you see the pressures that she's under too. I plug another great piece on ESPN about Maddie Skinner, everything that she's kind of dealt with. These athletes are dealing with a lot, and a lot of people can't be in their shoes. So I think that the more that we learn about mental health, the more we learn the expectations of pressure that not only they're putting on themselves, but from the outside, I think is good. And I think opens up a lot more dialogue to talk about what these players are dealing with, and is that fair to them, and how we can help them still perform at their best and be better people.
You mentioned John Cook's presence in her life. John Cook's presence on this team, and look, we know he's been doing this for years as far as getting the best out of whatever team he's able to assemble. This is a highly talented team with a lot of rock stars on the floor. But it's a group that has put themselves out there on social media. And I know sometimes that can make coaches a little uncomfortable and maybe feel like they're revealing too much of the operation. It's interesting. John Cook seems to, maybe with this group over the last 2 years, has enjoyed his time and has maybe learned as much from them as they have from him. Is that a fair statement, just in following him over the last 2 years with this particular group?
Yes. I think this group has really, this has been the evolution of John Cook. John Cook would not do this 10 years ago, but I think he's kind of changed with different athletes. And this group in particular, the fact that he's been with them for 2 years, I think they've really gotten to know him. They're comfortable with him. They still respect his authority as coach and listen to what he has to say, but it's a little more, there's a little back and forth dynamic too. It's a collaborative effort. It's not just this is my rules, or you have to follow them or you're gone. It's a more collaborative process too. And they have fun together too. I mean, this is the same group who went on a foreign trip last year for the most part. They have go to Hawaii every year, part of their beach season. They go through work camps together. Just a lot of road trips to the Pacific Northwest now this year too. So they spend a lot of time together and they enjoy it. And I think that John Cook has realized that you need to have fun. If you're not having fun, then you're just working yourself to death, and it's not worth it at that point. So I think he's embraced the fun, and this group has really brought that out in him.
Yeah, no, there's no question. Lincoln, this team and their path, it begins on Friday, Florida A&M, and then you've got South Dakota State, Miami, the winner of that. Everything will take place in Lincoln until if they make it that far, we'll get to the Final Four. That would be in Louisville. So they don't have to leave Lincoln until they would get to a potential Final Four. And that path to getting to the national semifinal path and possibly a national final is loaded. And to think that they'd have to maybe go through Wisconsin again too. If they were to make the Final Four, and then the other team, Division I program that made the NCAA tournament in Creighton, who's been outstanding all season long, and what Kirsten Bernthal Booth has done with that program and this particular team and a lot of the veterans they have, wouldn't it be interesting that we would have a national semifinal that could potentially pit Nebraska and Creighton? And that's so far down the road right now.
Yeah.
But this thing, it can go in so many different ways. What area of this part of the bracket concerns you the most for Nebraska?
I think there's two. I mean, Florida A&M, congrats on making the tournament. Enjoy your trip to Lincoln, playing in front of 8,000 people. They're not, I don't even know if they qualify as a speed bump, but good job. Miami is a little bit dangerous too. They own wins over Texas and Stanford too. So if things line up well for them, I think that's a little bit dangerous second round opponent too. But I think what really, I think the major flags are that Wisconsin, playing them for a third time this year, the rivalry with them, they know Nebraska well. Right. So I think that's the biggest hurdle Nebraska faces. But they're playing at Devaney. I think Nebraska is a different team when they play at home. And they haven't dropped a set to Wisconsin this year too. So I think
they've crazy. Shown it's crazy to me. That is absolutely crazy. Yeah. Like, not the fact they won twice, but to not drop a set is pretty remarkable.
And it wasn't even that close when they played at Devaney too. Nebraska went on big runs in early each set. I mean, They got closer later too, but Nebraska, it never felt like, oh, Wisconsin's in control. They're going to win this set, as Nebraska was playing in front almost the entire match too. So I don't know if it's just they figured out that, or Wisconsin was missing a couple key back row players in that. So that changes the dynamic a little bit too, but it's going to be fun. The committee, I mean, there could be 3 potential third matchups in the regional finals. You got Nebraska, Wisconsin, Louisville, Stanford, and then Pitt, SMU. So I think the other 2, the ACC matches have all been split, but Nebraska is the only one that has 1, 2. So there's a lot of storylines. I think, like I said, but I still think Pitt and Nebraska are a tier above everyone else. But after that, pure chaos. I mean, Creighton could do it, but Creighton's also in the same bracket as Penn State, as Texas. Yeah. I think all 3 of those could be very juicy storylines if they make the regional national semifinal and play Nebraska too, though. So it's just a wealth of great teams that are in the tournament, and you're going to have a tough draw no matter where you fall in the bracket.
Lincoln, what's been this is where we're going to have to get nitpicky here with Nebraska. We've just spent the last 20 minutes talking about how good they have been playing and feel like they're playing like every coach wants to be feeling like you're going into the postseason, you're playing your best volleyball. What would John Cook say still is out there for them to maybe the best way to describe it would be to tighten it up?
Yep. I think there's three main areas. One, hopefully you saw against Maryland, Merritt Beeson. If it goes off and is terminal hitting above 400, Nebraska is a different team playing at elite level. 2, Taylor Landfair, if she can get going. And she has had occasional good stretches too, but just if she can find a way to be terminal, Nebraska's again a different team if they have options that can terminate. That's Nebraska's biggest problem. They can dig a team to death, but they need to get points on their own. And then 3, I think just making sure it all kind of those 2 both go down to Bergen Riley. If she can have good connections, good timing with her hitters, get the middle blockers involved, that's going to be key. So I mean, those are the 3 question marks. I think Nebraska's defense is one of the best in the nation. Their block is very good. Harper Murray will get hers. Andy Jackson will get hers. But if Merritt Beeson can go off, then get something productive from Taylor Landfair, she can be low air, and Bergen Riley can put her hitters in position to win. I think Nebraska will make a very deep run and could be playing on ABC in late December.
We saw in the national championship game last year, and the only reason I bring this up is because we saw a little bit of that early when Nebraska's still trying to kind of figure things out, and that was service errors and just having some defensive laps. We saw that in the Texas match in the national championship game. We saw it a little bit early on. Is that, in your opinion, is that a big thing of the past?
I think it's a thing of the past. I mean, it still could crop up. I mean, you probably a weird match in a weird arena you're not used to, but I think that's one of the things that Olivia Malk has really shored up is that serve receive too. And some teams have had some. I mean, Penn State had a little bit of success. Maryland had a little bit of success of kind of yo-yo serving of we'll serve you deep and then we'll serve you short and kind of. So defenders don't really know. They can't. It's not just hard passing. It's running up and then passing. So I don't think it'll be Nebraska's downfall, but it would be something that they've, for the most part, figured out how to be. I mean, I think they still are have given up the fewest aces in the nation, and it's not that close. So I haven't looked at that stat in a week or 2, but Nebraska is one of the best serve receive teams in the nation too. But it's a matter of who they're going to run to. If they play Pitt, Pitt has some great servers. Olivia Babcock's one of the best in the nation. So can they handle that under the bright lights? That's another thing too, is get that national TV coverage in the Final Four with everything's on the line. Can you remain calm and dig?
Lincoln, it's the moment of truth as this thing gets underway on Friday. First of all, will Nebraska find themselves in Louisville, Kentucky?
Yes, I feel fairly confident about that. I think that, Nebraska, I like Nebraska's draws for as tough as it is. Again, everyone has a tough draw, but I like Nebraska's draw. And as tough as playing a team for the third team is, they figured out that they know how to beat this Wisconsin team.
Will they find themselves in the final match?
Yes. I think that, I mean, this is a different Texas team. Nebraska's proven against Creighton. And I hope Penn State makes it, because I would like to see Nebraska, Penn State play again, not in Happy Valley, not in front of a Penn State heavy crowd. That I think that kind of shook Nebraska a little bit. If they play in a neutral arena, or even where most of the fans are for Nebraska, they've learned some lessons. I think Nebraska can do it.
Okay, then you know what's coming next. Is this the team? Is this the last team standing? Do they do what they didn't do last year? Do they outlast whoever that opponent is in the final match in the national championship?
I am excited. I hope, again, Pitt is a very good team. They have probably the National Player of the Year in Olivia Babcock. Tori Stafford is amazing. Rachel Fairbanks is one of the better setters in the nation. I am scared of Pitt. I've watched them a lot just because they play weird times on the ACC network. I am excited. If they play 10 times, if they play 100 times, it's probably a 55-45 split. Nebraska can win. I mean, Pitt has a lot of firepower. That scares
me.
There's
some reluctance there, Lincoln. I appreciate that. I know,
my first gut reaction bracket, I picked Pitt to win.
Okay.
But in my wild and crazy bracket, I'm going to pick Nebraska to win too, because Nebraska Nebraska can beat Pitt. I will say that. What happens if they meet on a Sunday afternoon in Louisville? Anything can happen too. But again, it's one of those, like I said, 55-45 splits. If they played 100 times, I hope that happens. I hope we get to see that. Volleyball will win. Whether or not that's Nebraska winning, they have the possibility to do so. I don't know if they will. I am bad at predicting.
All right. That's okay. That's all right. I bet if I were to have asked you this last year leading into the national championship game, if Texas or Nebraska would be triumphant, I think you would take the Huskers, right?
Last year going into the match, I thought Nebraska would win. I mean, Texas was playing hot. They were serving hot. I thought Nebraska was going to win but then Nebraska melted down. They got served off the court. So Nebraska's learned that lesson though. And this is a very experienced team. You talk about that group of seniors. Lexi Rodriguez has played in 2 national titles. I mean, Pitt's played in 3 Final Fours, but they've never played in a national title match. So that's experience. Hopefully they can use to their advantage in December.
Lincoln, just before we let you go, where can people find your work? I know great stuff at HuskersIllustrated.com. Where can they stay up to date on all the coverage as we get things underway on Friday?
Yes, Huskers Illustrated. I'll post that. You can follow me on Twitter, Lincoln_VB, Blue Sky. We're there too. Also, I'd have you like podcasts? Of course you like podcasts. You're listening to watching this.
What we're doing.
Volleyball State. Jeff Sheldon and I do a weekly recap. Usually comes out on Mondays. So we have all your volleyball news and happenings and insight and analysis there too.
You guys are you and Jeff, by the way, fantastic stuff too. Lincoln, for my money, no one does it better than you, and so appreciate you spending time. I know this is what we build up to now on Friday, and all the fun gets started.
Well, the good thing is our podcasts are free, so you can keep all your money. Appreciate having me on, Nick. It's always good to talk.
All right, see you, Lincoln. Thank you. Lincoln Arneal of Huskers Illustrated, one of the great scribes covering Nebraska volleyball and college volleyball, the sport, as we've mentioned many times throughout that conversation. A lot of great showcase, a lot of great match opportunities, the way that these brackets shake out. I'm going to take Nebraska. I think they get it done. I absolutely respect Lincoln's concern about Pitt, and they're not the number 1 team for nothing. But I feel he mentioned Lexi Rodriguez being in 2 national championship matches. There's something about that type of experience. And I think Nebraska being on the one end against Wisconsin 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, I should say, when they went and played Wisconsin, they were considered the underdog, and they fought tooth and nail in that one. Then there was last year where I think everyone felt Nebraska got a little bit of a break. Texas pulls an upset, and that they were going to be able to take care of Texas. And that was a very humbling experience for this group. The good news is that entire group is back with some reinforcements as well. I think that experience and understanding the importance of that moment and how to handle the nerves and all the little things that I think give you an advantage. I think if Nebraska gets to that point, they were going to be much better served than they were a year ago. I like Nebraska winning this entire thing, and that is not a homer take. You tell me who is playing better. Not as good, because we can make that argument for Pitt, but who is playing better than Nebraska right now? We'll see what happens. It all starts Friday again. Friday night is when Nebraska will have first serve against Florida A&M. They will take on the winner of Miami and South Dakota State. If they prevail out of the first and second round, then the regional semis and regional finals will also be at the Bob Devaney Sports Center, which is a huge, huge advantage for the Big Red. Getting back to Big Red football before I wrap things up, I did want to get into a little bit of the transfer portal portion of this. And as I'm recording right now, and this is Wednesday on the early National Signing Day, where By the way, I before I get into the transfer portals, I know I get distracted so easily. There was a fantastic deke or psych. I always love a good psych. Everybody remembers the old psychs back in the day. There was a fantastic psych that was done by Dawson Merritt. Now, I'm sorry, not Dawson Merritt. It was actually Cortez Mills. So Cortez Mills, who was originally committed to University of Oklahoma, and if you were following Cortez Mills and his recruitment, you knew that, okay, it sounded like Cortez Mills was a guy that could very well start leaning towards Nebraska. There was a lot of momentum for him. And what he did was very humorous. Now, I know there are people out there that don't like some of the pomp and circumstance that comes with signing day and the hat ceremonies and, the guy sending out videos and what have you. But what Cortez Mills did in making his official announcement was, in my opinion, because it went Nebraska's way, was legendary. But I also feel a little bit for Oklahoma. They're missing out on a 6 foot, 165 speedster wide receiver out of Homestead, Florida. And as he's making his official announcement, he says University of Oklahoma. He puts on the OU hat. He's got this shirt on. And then all of a sudden he says, wait, hold on. Something about the shirt doesn't feel right. And he pulls off the shirt and he's just got a tank top underneath. And then he throws on a Nebraska shirt. So Oklahoma, who knew the rumors that he might very well flip to Nebraska, or hearing him say that, are like, oh my gosh, okay, whew, worry for nothing. And then that happens. I feel for you, Oklahoma. That is a tough one. It is a good class, and I'm going to do a podcast later on this week, talk a little bit about some of the impact guys, including the linebacking core. A lot of local guys, but the linebacking core between Dawson Merritt, between obviously Christian Jones of Omaha West Side. Then you get more guys on the defensive side too that are going to contribute at linebacker in the secondary, and Pierce Mooberry and Caden Vermas. A lot of speed there, some physical attributes as well. There is a young group that is going to be, if they can stay together and get developed. That's why I talked about this earlier on the show, man. I hope Rob Dvorak is a part of this defense of staff. He is, I think, a very, very valuable commodity on that defensive staff. But with the transfers real quick. Now, as it stands right now, here are the guys that are leaving Nebraska. You've got Jamari Butler, Malachi Coleman. You've got Mekhi Bear, Gabe Irvin, Vincent Jackson, Danny Kalen, Sincere Seifi Lua, who we already knew that was a while back, Stephon Thompson, Princewell, Human Yellen, and James Williams. The Danny Kalen one, to me, it's disappointing from the standpoint of homegrown guy. He was a guy who decommitted from Missouri to come to Nebraska after Nebraska essentially lost out on Dylan Raiola initially. He was all locked in, and then at the 11th hour, as we all know, we remember this a year ago, that Dylan Raiola, we'll always remember that weekend, that Friday where Kyle McCord is in town. You're thinking Kyle McCord is going to be the transfer quarterback. He's going to be the bridge guy, and then they're going to mold Danny Kalen. Well, then we realize, oh my gosh, is there real rumors that Dylan Raiola is thinking of flip from Georgia to Nebraska? Of course, that happens. Danny Kalen, I think, did for 24 hours, opened his recruitment up very briefly and then closed it back down and stuck with Nebraska. I always thought if the path and the plan for Dylan was, as it played out, of him being the starter from the get-go, which it seemed like as soon as he signed that was going to be the case, that it was going to be interesting it was going to be interesting to see how Danny Kalen handled everything, but also going to be very tough to keep him. Now, there was, I think, a lot of people thinking, well, what if something happens to Dylan Raiola and Danny Kalen is thrown into some action? Of course, Heinrich Harburg was there, but, maybe he's going to be thrown into some action. Well, that never happened. He never played a snap. And I think it makes a lot of sense. That one I'm bummed about because I wanted to see what Danny Kalen eventually could do in a Nebraska uniform. But for me personally, I think it's going to be a lot more important to see the year 1 to year 2 jump that Dylan Raiola makes. I get why Danny Kaelin is leaving. I wish him nothing but the best. He handled that situation better than I think anybody could ever imagine. And from all accounts, was a tremendous competitor and teammate during the entire process. So Danny Kaelin, I hope he shines elsewhere. Not surprised by that, but that will rank higher on my bummer category. The other one, and I mentioned earlier, James Williams. James Williams, I thought his development and just his overall connection to this program, I was hoping that we would see at least another year out of that. It is interesting, though. There's that connection with this program, but I think more importantly, that connection to Terrence Knighton. That with Terrence Knighton leaving and presumably with Tony White to Florida State, that James Williams is going to be a guy that is probably looking to follow both his DC and his defensive line coach. I think, A, you can't blame him when you have that strong of a bond, and a lot of people know James Williams' story. B, doesn't mean you can't be disappointed, and also go as far as saying that hurts this defensive line. James Williams was continuing to develop his length, the leverage that he would get, the speed, and he was continuing to get better and better. That's a miss. But that one surprised me a little bit. But I think when you look back into the connection that he had with Terrence Knighton, maybe it shouldn't be so surprising. Gabe Ervin. Gabe Ervin was the odd man out. Gabe Ervin has never been able to be healthy, and that's not his fault. But even when Gabe Ervin was healthy, and I say that because he just never really was, he had a tough time emerging as that reliable, explosive running back. But, I mean, when you have an ACL injury and then the hip injury this last year, there are a lot of things on the lower body that were working against Gabe Ervin. So for me personally, that one makes sense. That one is the perfect example of you hope it works out well somewhere else, because the guy did everything he could to get on the field, and physically it just wasn't happening. But he was never, even when he was healthy, that explosive running back that you need to see at that position, the difference maker that Nebraska needs at that position. Malachi Coleman, I think everybody knew the rumblings of that going through the, playing as a true freshman, then the developmental redshirt season. I just, that didn't surprise me at all. And quite frankly, we'll find out how big of a factor that is with Nebraska, depending on how they develop the guys currently on the roster. We mentioned a new wide receiver coach coming in to the staff, but also what Nebraska wants to do in the transfer portal when it comes to wide receiver, because I think there is at least one big one you have to go after, and I'm talking about a game changer and running back. Those have to, offensively, those have to be two major additions. Stephon Thompson, again, no surprise because of Tony White's departure. Princewell, this was the thing where you saw his snap count going down. I think there were guys that were very just around him were probably starting to catch up to him. I don't think Princewell necessarily felt like maybe he fit in the best this year. Given that dip in production and dip in snap count, I'm not shocked by this. That doesn't say that this couldn't hurt this defense, because when I think of the future of this defense and I think of this young group that they're going to have, and the guys like Riley Van Poppel and some of those young guys on the front, looking at, why am I completely blanking on his name? Cam Lenhart, another guy that, I thought the world of as a true freshman. You start thinking of that young wave of that front seven. I think a lot of people had Princewell in that. So from the youth movement, that one does hurt. The other guy that for me personally, I was hoping would be part of that mix too, and solidifying what I think is going to be a talented, but again, somewhat young linebacking core be Mekhi Bear. I think Mekhi Bear in the 2 years under Tony White has played his best football and has been, for the most part, a very reliable player on the defensive side of the football. So the Mekhi Bear one, to me, hurts a little bit. I was a little surprised by that one. And then I think a lot of us, I was actually talking to Adam Carricker about this the other night. The one that's interesting is Jamari Butler, because of the fact that he was talking about the great reasons why he would want to come back and play college football another year and play at Nebraska, and then you find out that he's in the transfer portal. But maybe some of us forget he was in the portal again last year and came back. I don't know if this is a matter of shopping around. I don't know if this is a matter of trying to see if he can find a spot with Tony White. But Jamari Butler, just given the fact that he was very high on Nebraska and the experience that he had, that maybe took people by surprise a little bit. And it could be as simple as, well, he was high on Nebraska. He was high on everything about the culture, but a big part of that was Tony White. So there is that Tony White impact. For me personally, the one guy that surprises me the most is probably James Williams. That one has an impact. I think Mekhi Bear has an impact as well. But that 105, that number that Nebraska has to get to, that 105, you got to make decisions. I don't know if we'll ever know who was actually ushered out as opposed to who decided to leave for a better situation. And when I say ushered out, when you're talking about big picture stuff with your position coach and with your head coach, and they don't necessarily have a crystal clear plan of you being on the 2 deep or a starter, those guys start thinking about other opportunities. But for guys that were going to be a part of that 2 deep, maybe even as starters, and yet they still decide to leave, well, again, that's where we are in college football. Last year, it was very uneventful. Every name that decided to leave made sense. This year, there are some names of, you can circle a bunch of guys and say, boy, that's interesting because they could help us next year, or they could help us in 2026. And that's what it's going to come down to now with getting down to 105. So a lot to chew on there when it comes to this. The signing day so far, no major surprises for Nebraska. I guess Dawson Merritt, we knew that he had flipped. He signed. So that's official. Christian Jones is a huge get. Still just watching the handful of games I had a chance to between last year and this year of him. That dude is a stud. Cannot wait to see him. A lot of guys to get to, but the Cortez Mills flip, that did happen. Michael Terry, by the way, did not commit to Nebraska. He is at Texas. I think a lot of people were expecting that, seeing that there as we got closer to today. So I'll have some conversation about the impact guys, especially in this class, as we've seen Matt Rule is not afraid to play true freshmen. So out of this class, who could be the biggest impact on either side of the football? Also, as I was talking to Evan Bland earlier, will we see some more staff shakeup when it comes to special teams and Ed Foley? All of that still remains in flux. We will get into all of that when I come back this week before we get to championship Saturday and, well, I guess championship Friday for college football championships and then the bowl game. I'll have a special Sunday pod to let you know exactly where Nebraska is going, who they're playing, what that matchup looks like. But before that, on Friday, I will have a podcast to wrap up signing day, talk a little bit about those impact guys. I'll have a guest on. Also for my Nebraska fans, you know who you are. You long-suffering fools like myself that root for both Nebraska and the Chicago Bears. Obviously, they had a very interesting week going back to the Thanksgiving game against Detroit's one of the worst endings in coaching malpractice you've ever seen, led to the firing, something that ownership doesn't do ever in the Chicago Bears, and that is fire a head coach mid-season. It was that bad that they had to fire Matt Eberflus. So my good friend from ESPN 1000, Carmen DeFalco, he does a sports talk show, has been there forever covering the Chicago Bears team. He will jump on and spend some time talking a little NFL and talking about where the Bears might go next. Until then, again, big thanks to Lincoln Arneal, also to Husker Max. Until then, I will talk to you. Have a great rest of your day. You've been listening to The Nick Handley Show.